Hey guys, Shane Sosa with Palco Claims. Wanted to come at you and give you a little bit more information about why insurance claims go wrong and how to avoid it. So some of the biggest mistakes that we see homeowners make during claims is delaying, right? Good example with a hailstorm. So in states like Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, Kansas, the states that we service, they get hailstorms multiple times a year. And a lot of times people will delay in filing a claim, especially early in the storm season, because they just don't want to file a claim yet if there's another storm going to come later. Problem with that is, especially in Texas, you have something that's kind of technical. It's called the concurrent causation issue. So you have to be able to distinguish which hailstorm caused which damage. Because remember, when you file a claim, you have to use a date of loss or the date of the storm, right? So let's say it was April 23rd, and that's when the hailstorm came, and it was 1-inch hail, and you didn't file the claim. Then a smaller storm comes, in June, you finally get a door knock from a roofing contractor. He does his inspection, he finds damage, and tells you to use the June storm, which was smaller hail. Let's say it was 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch hail, and the damage that he was seeing up there doesn't really quite coincide with the date of loss. Well, that would be an improper date of loss for the damage. One big mistake is, like I said, delaying whenever you know what the actual date of loss is. And some people just don't know. But that's why consulting with a public adjuster is always great, because we can do weather data research. We can, there's a chance we're familiar with the area and we know what date you should use. And most of the contractors will know too, right? They're knocking doors, they're replacing roofs and things like that. So just make sure you're doing your due diligence. The other thing that's a big mistake during property claims is filing claims incorrectly. For example, the biggest one for storm claims, for example, is, let's say you have a homeowner who has shingles that were ripped off of their roof. Of course, what ripped off the shingles? Well, wind did, right? So they call their insurance company and they file a wind damage claim, not knowing that the insurance company is only going to look at wind-related damages. Now, if there was a hail event during that same storm, but obviously hail is not going to knock off the shingles, you want to make sure that you're claiming hail and wind, because that was what actually happened in the storm event, right? So we've seen it where insurance companies will say, well, they only filed it for wind. I can only look at wind damage whenever there's ample hail present on the roof or on the property and things like that. If it's a hailstorm, hail and wind can sometimes go side by side with each other. Sometimes a windstorm can come through 75, 80 mile an hour winds with no hail, right? That's a true wind event. If that ripped off shingles and blew over your fence and things like that, that's a true wind event. So, that makes sense. The other thing that's really common is when people say, well, my house flooded. In reality, what happened is maybe you had a burst pipe or, something to that effect that allowed a lot of water to come in the house that quote unquote flooded the property. But at the end of the day, that's not a flood claim. Flood, by definition, is water from the outside coming into your home. Mold with water losses are very common. So at the end of the day, when you have mold, is it mold as a result of the water? And are the things that are water damaged now growing mold? Because if they are, well, those water damaged things were going to get ripped out anyways, right? If you have mold on areas that were not water damaged or not affected by the cause of loss, that would be separate, and most policies would require a separate mold endorsement. So you don't want to file a mold claim when in reality it's an accidental discharge of the plumbing system or a pipe break or things like that. So you really got to know how to claim these things properly. Now, the next thing we'll talk about is why initial insurance estimates are incomplete. And it's just a few things really, especially in the peak of storm season or in a catastrophe, or there's a lot of tornadoes that may have come through or wildfires or something like that. The biggest reason that they're incomplete is these people that are coming from the insurance company are rushing. They're rushing because they have too many appointments that day. Not that they're trying to lowball you or anything like that, but at the end of the day, if they have 7 or 8 appointments that day, they have to rush. They have to get in, take their pictures, write their notes, and get on to the next one. The other thing is inexperience. I've been on multiple large, complex, both residential and commercial claims where the adjuster or the representative they sent out just didn't have the experience to properly scope the loss and write a complete estimate. The other thing is the carrier guidelines. And if you're a contractor or a public adjuster or an appraiser, you know that these insurance companies have estimating guidelines. For example, I was on an adjustment one time with an insurance carrier, and he knew that this house did not have code required drip edge on the roof system. And he said, well, yes, I know it needs to be on the estimate, but they won't let me write for it, right? So right then and there, I knew his estimate was going to be incomplete on something we both knew needed to be on the estimate, but he couldn't leave it off because of his carrier guidelines, right? So the carrier guidelines are going to automatically set up the estimate being incomplete. So those are just a couple of reasons why insurance estimates are incomplete and why we see on average about a 40% increase from the initial insurance estimate to the final approved settlement. Now, that is an average. We've seen it to where we've taken a fully denied claim to 6 figures. I've seen it to where we've taken a $20,000 claim and turned it into a $50,000 claim. I mean, there's just so many variables. But on average, we're seeing about a 40% increase from start to finish when we get involved. So the next bullet point is remembering that the burden of proof is on the policyholder. A lot of people don't know that, especially homeowners who just, they've never filed a claim before, or maybe they've only filed one claim in their life. And they think that they just, call their insurance company, report a claim for hail damage, for example, and that the insurance company is going to come out and look at everything possible and then write you a check. Well, unfortunately, that's how the system thinks it should be done, but that's not actually how it works in real life. The burden of proof always is on the policyholder. And as public adjusters, we help policyholders fulfill their burden of proof. So what does that even mean? Burden of proof. Well, you have to prove what happened. You have to prove when it happened. You have to prove what all got damaged. You have to prove how much it's going to cost to repair the damaged items. All of that stuff, that's what we call a proof of loss package. We provide weather data, photos, estimates, any other third-party reports that basically help tell the narrative of why this claim has been filed in the first place and why it should be paid. So if you're a policyholder who's just filing a claim and is hoping the insurance company is going to come out and pay for everything they're supposed to pay for, like I said previously, they're not set up to do that way and to do it accurately. They're going to come out, they're going to rush, they're going to have carrier guidelines that are going to limit them from writing a full and complete estimate. So again, you're already behind the 8 ball when it comes to that. That'll take me to my next point. When do you bring in a public adjuster? My opinion is that you would always bring in a public adjuster on a complex loss. What's a complex loss? A fire. Could be a kitchen fire, it could be an electrical fire, it could be any kind of fire. But if the home was smoked out and maybe the fire was just contained to the kitchen or a bedroom or the garage, for example, but it smoked out the entire house, well, the smoke is a byproduct of the fire. And now all that smoke damage needs to be addressed and put into the claim. I was part of a claim recently in San Antonio. There was a truck in the driveway, not in the garage, but in the driveway, which caught fire, which then caught the garage on fire, which smoked out the entire house. Farmers was the insurance company on that one. They wrote an estimate for about $45,000. So you're thinking, okay, they came out $45,000. Sure, sounds okay. Ended up settling for about $330,000. So from $45,000 to $330,000 is a big issue. And the problem is, and what I think was the success on all that was the proof of loss, right? The hygienist report was very thorough, and we were able to effectively prove why this loss was a $330,000 loss and not a $45,000 loss. So it's things like that. Knowing when to bring in a public adjuster is like dealing with complex losses. The other time when you want to bring in a public adjuster is whenever there's a claim involving a lot of personal property, like in a fire, your personal belongings got burned up, or in a significant water loss where everything just got wet, or another example is when you're having to deal with additional living expenses. You're having to move into a hotel for an extended period of time or a short-term rental, things like that. Those are great times to bring in a public adjuster. Commercial claims are great. Commercial claims almost always benefit from a public adjuster. There's so many moving pieces. Those policies are typically well over 100 pages long. So many caveats there. And of course, when it comes to a commercial claim, there's a business involved, right? And the person who's responsible for filing that claim also has another job to do, right? Their primary job. They don't necessarily have the time, knowledge, or desire to go back and forth with the insurance company, especially if you don't know. And why would you know? Why would you know how to effectively prove the loss, as I mentioned earlier? So commercial claims almost always benefit from a public adjuster. And then at the end of the day, what we mostly see is bringing in a public adjuster after the first denial. Assuming you did everything that I mentioned previously, you showed them the day that the hail fell, they showed them all the hail damage, and for whatever reason, your claim was denied for wear and tear or poor installation or any other reasons that they're going to talk about on their denial letter, that's a great time to bring in a public adjuster. So to recap, complex losses, claims involving personal property and additional living expenses, commercial claims, and after the first denial are great times to bring in a public adjuster. I hope this episode was helpful for you. If you have any questions, we give free claim consults all the time. So give us a call, 512-553-6432, or check us out on palcoclaims.com.